Have you ever stopped and wondered why the world's biggest powers aren't at war with each other right now? For decades, we've had a pretty standard answer to that question. But what if that answer is completely wrong? Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating and, honestly, a pretty provocative new idea called the entropic peace theory. So before we can really get into this new theory, we've got to look at the idea that it's up against. For a long time, one major explanation has pretty much dominated the conversation about what keeps the great powers from each other's throats. I mean, it's a huge question, right? It's something people have wrestled with for generations. And for most of the last century, the go-to explanation was all based on a shared ideal. And this is it, the democratic peace theory. The logic behind it is actually pretty simple and, kind of elegant. The idea is that nations that share democratic values, things like free elections, human rights, the rule of law, they see each other as being on the same team, and so they're way less likely to fight. They talk things out, they use diplomacy, not missiles. For a long time, this was a cornerstone of how we thought about the world. But just look around today. We're seeing all these rising tensions between major powers with totally different systems. Does a shared political ideology really feel like the glue that's holding everything together? Or could there be something else, something deeper, maybe a little colder, at play? And this is where our new theory comes into the picture. It asks us to make a fundamental shift in how we think about peace, to move away from ideals and morality and toward a much more pragmatic reality. And wow, this quote just cuts right to the chase, doesn't it? It gets to the very heart of the argument. It's suggesting that peace isn't some virtuous choice we make. It's a condition that's forced upon us by the sheer overwhelming exhaustion of the system itself. So that brings us to the main event, the entropic peace theory. Let's really break down what this new framework is all about. Okay, so here's the absolute core of it. Forget shared values for just a moment. This theory argues that peace is basically a side effect of complexity. Our modern world is just too tangled, too interconnected for a huge war between major powers to be a rational choice for anyone. So, how does all that complexity actually stop a war from happening? Well, the theory has a name for the mechanism that sounds like it's straight out of a physics class: cascading entropy. Let's take a look at how it works. I want you to think of the global system not as a bunch of separate countries, but more like a single, gigantic, tightly woven net. Every nation is a thread, and all of those threads are linked together, creating this web of dependencies that, in a way, supports everyone. And these are the actual threads that make up that net. This isn't abstract stuff. We're talking about the global supply chains that build your phone, the international financial markets that manage our savings, and the energy markets that power our homes. Everything is deeply, deeply linked. And here's the punchline. If you pull violently on one of those threads, let's say by starting a big war, you don't just damage your enemy. The shockwave travels through the entire net, and that backlash will absolutely come right back around and tear your own position apart. And that is cascading entropy in action. Entropy is really just a term for disorder or chaos. A major war, a real physical conflict, would inject so much chaos into one part of the system that it would set off a chain reaction of failures. Supply chains would collapse. Financial markets would panic. You'd have energy crises. The damage doesn't stay contained. It just cascades. It spreads uncontrollably. So if that's the mechanism, what's the actual outcome? The theory gives it a name that's chillingly familiar. It's like a modern update to an old Cold War idea. Back in the Cold War, the big deterrent was mutual assured destruction, MAD, the threat of nuclear war. Well, this theory argues that the new deterrent is mutual assured bankruptcy. Any attacker knows that the cascading chaos they would unleash would cripple their own economy just as surely as it would their targets. It becomes a war that nobody can actually afford to win. So let's just put them side by side for a second. The old theory, democratic peace, sees peace as this positive thing that comes from shared values, like a handshake between friends. But the entropic peace theory, it sees peace as a negative outcome, born from a shared vulnerability. Peace isn't a choice. It's a straitjacket woven from global supply chains and fiber optic cables. And this is really the bottom line. What does it even mean to win a war if your prize is the total collapse of the global economic system that keeps your own country running? The price of victory is bankruptcy, chaos, and, systemic exhaustion. And this is the thought I really want to leave you with. This theory, it paints a compelling, if maybe a little unsettling, picture of our world. But it all hinges on this incredibly complex system staying intact. So the final question we have to ask is a crucial one. What happens to this fragile, entropic peace if the system that enforces it starts to simplify, or even to break apart?